Chapter 10. Illyrian awakened to the early pink stirrings of dawn. The authority which fell to him in Salic's absence thrilled through him like a fine wine, but he knew from his own war experience it would take more than political power to gain the soldiers' unquestioning obedience. Lacking Salic's popularity or Captain Tazir's confident authority, Illyrian realized he would lead these men by superstitious fear or not at all. But first, he needed to appraise his opposition. Salic's second-in-command, Barrett, was a foot soldier who held his rank only because the Baron had kept the remainder of his officers home to guard the city. The young commander might well prove ineffectual and easily dominated. Illyrian felt compelled to test Barrett's limits. Illyrian jabbed the nearest guardsman with his toes. "You there, start the fire." The soldier startled awake. He fixed sharp, dark eyes on Illyrian. "Start your own fire. I'm not your errand boy." Illyrian pretended to be infuriated by the man's insolence. He leaped to his feet. "You ignorant, dirt-eating peasant, who do you think you're talking to?" Illyrian's shout roused the camp. From behind him, a bass voice rang with challenge. "Stop it, Illyrian. The men are my charge until Salic's return." Illyrian whirled to face Barrett. He sat enmeshed in a dirty woolen blanket. Brown hair hugged his head in tight curls. A beard encased his jutting chin like foam. Carefully, Illyrian channeled his anger against the second-in-command. "Witless fool, I'm the ranking officer." "Ranking political officer," Barrett corrected. "I'm the ranking military officer. You hold an advisory position. For now, I lead the soldiers, and I can use or discard your designs as I see fit." Illyrian feigned raw fury, seeking to undermine Barrett's command. "You power-grabbing worm! Would you see more of our soldiers injured? Wasn't that fiasco at the cliff face enough for you? Political or military, I have far more war experience than you." Barrett freed his broad-boned frame from his covers. His face went wooden with offense. "Enough of this cat fight. We can settle our differences in solitude. Let the men have what little sleep remains to them." He snatched up his blanket and withdrew a short distance from the campsite. Illyrian stalked after him. He waited only until Barrett settled into position on the ground. "Advisor only? Faugh! I was part of this army while you still suckled your mother's breast." Barrett hesitated, apparently previously unaware of Illyrian's revelation. His demeanor went deadly calm. "You've overstepped your bounds. One more outburst, Illyrian, and I'll consider this mutiny." His fingers clamped about his sword hilt. "It's within my rights to slay you for treason." Bitter irony checked Illyrian's game. His expression went bland in recognition of temporary defeat. Suddenly, he cursed Barrett's strength, knowing he would need to dispose of both commanders before he could gain control of Salic's patrol. "Forgive me, Barrett. I spent too long in court, and grown accustomed to the servants there obeying my every whim." He sat beside the second-in-command and forced a tremor into his voice. "Salic's long absence has my nerves wound in coils. I'm sorry." Barrett accepted Illyrian's apology with an unconvinced grunt. He wrapped himself in his blanket again in an obvious attempt to recapture sleep. Illyrian remained awake, calculating, attentive to the distant whispered conjectures of the guardsmen. As the sun's edge gained the eastern horizon, their conversation died to snores. Beside Illyrian, Barrett's chest rose and fell in a heavy pattern of slumber. A sudden pulse of light blinded Illyrian. Surprise wrenched him backward. Barrett jarred awake. Before them, Mordath stood, his dark robes torn and dirty. One nail of his staff was neatly snapped off at its base. "Mordath!" Illyrian pressed toward the sorcerer, eager for news. "What happened?" Bitter scorn colored Mordath's reply. "I nearly killed myself covering your guards' incompetence. The fugitives are gone, mounted now. Hell's icy citadel will dance with flame before we ride them down again." Barrett ignored Mordath's blatant insult. His harried question revealed his own concerns. "Our men." Mordath turned indifferent eyes on Barrett. "The 3 survivors await our arrival at the camp." Barrett's sinews went taut. He climbed to his feet. "Salic," he asked tentatively. Mordath made no attempt to soften the news. "The barbarian cut him down with a single stroke." Illyrian went tense with excitement. Baron's face crumbled to a mask of regret. "Agarin," the commander whispered. Mordath spoke through morning glare. "Swiftly now. Rouse the men. The ferry sails in 5 days, and we must make haste to Calmer Port." "No." Grief wrenched the authority from Barrett's command. Salik's last order was to break the hunt and return to Cullensburg in the event of his death. A hiss of anger escaped Illyrian's lips. We must chase the barbarian until captured by the Baron's direct order. Now who suggests treason? Barrett's rebuke rattled with warning. I answer directly to Salik. His command has passed to me, and I will not go against his final order. Fury jangled against Illyrian's control. He hesitated, barely restraining his hatred. In the ensuing stillness of Illyrian's struggle, Mordath spoke with haughty assurance. Let them leave. They're dung beetles in a contest between lions. We're better off free of them. Barrett wisely held his tongue and headed toward camp to organize his men. Illyrian pulled Mordath aside. Charged with purpose, he addressed the sorcerer with impudent harshness. Has a single failure addled you? Your casual indifference will lose us an army. No great loss. Mordath shrugged. So far, Cullensburg's soldiers have served no other purpose than to get in my way. Illyrian's tone went deceptively soft. Not so. The sword strokes which took the lives of 3 soldiers would otherwise have been aimed at you. At worst, the effort it would take Moonbear and Aaron to hew through nearly 50 soldiers would buy time for your magics. At best, given the proper circumstances, you will discover the guardsmen are more than capable fighters. Apparently, Mordath's rash dismissal was the product of emotion, for his intentions were easily swayed. Fine, but how do you propose we convince Barrett? He seems determined. Illyrian's lips wreathed into a grin of cold purpose. Grimly he plotted, thoughts clustered like a cancer within him. With your help, I've no knowledge of sorceries. What abilities do you have at your disposal? Mordath frowned disapprovingly. I have a vast repertoire, but I expend the least energy controlling weather, snow, wind gusts, parching heat. Illyrian licked his lips, his thoughts hungry for power. Storms? Storms, Mordath confirmed. Ideas jostled through Illyrian's mind, forming to a clear path of resolution. His expression was as cold as an Arctic wind. The sun crept into view, a full golden eye which illuminated the blue arch of the morning sky. Cullensburg's soldiers scurried to prepare for departure. Bits clacked against horses' teeth. Men strapped rolled blankets to their backs. Perched on a large stone, Commander Barrett sharpened his sword blade. The whetstone slashed across the steel edge with a snake-like hiss. In the center of camp, the cook for the day stirred a huge kettle of breakfast soup with a wooden ladle. Leaving Mordath hidden in the brush, Illyrian walked to the cooking fire. Bold certainty characterized his movements, but it was a feigned confidence. Beneath his calm exterior, the nobleman felt twitchy as a rat. He knew only a drastic action would gain the soldier's interest. With a quick motion, Illyrian seized the spoon from the cook's hand, bashed it against the kettle with repetitive, ringing strokes, and tossed it. The ladle flew in a wide arc, splattering soup across the nearest guardsman. It struck the ground and rolled, its surface coated with forest silt. Suddenly, Illyrian held every man's attention. The cook stood astounded, his mouth open and closing in silent outrage. Illyrian shouted over the angered protests of the soup-splashed guardsmen. Friends and warriors, I've a message from our lord, Baron Dietrich of Cullensburg. A murmur of grudging acceptance passed through the gathering. Barrett pocketed his whetstone, and his eyes followed the nobleman with dark mistrust. Illyrian continued, As you know, the Baron rules by the divine right of our gods, a Garin who supplies our gold and silver, Mardane who controls our births with the sun or moon and places a star for the soul of every brave man or woman who dies, and a host of lesser divinities who sanction his rule. Long live our Baron! From habit, the men repeated the platitude, Long live our Baron! They fidgeted, impatient with affairs of state. Illyrian focused his attention on Barrett. As you also know, Baron Dietrich sent us after a barbarian and a thief, with explicit orders to bring them home at any cost. Our brave captain Salik led us toward that goal, but those of you who noticed a new star in the heavens realized he lost his life to the Baron's cause. Head bowed, Illyrian worked sadness into his voice. May Mardane hold his soul as sacred. Horror etched many of the guardsmen's faces. Conversations broke out through the ranks, but Illyrian had gained their full attention, and an exuberant wave of the nobleman's hand silenced their talk. Illyrian's exposition gained a fevered determination. My friends, despite my deep and heartfelt grief, it has become my duty to inform you of a great wrong. Were he alive, Salik would still lead you to fulfill his promises to the Baron. but circumstance has left a coward in his place, a man who would abandon Salec's trust and convince you to return to Collinsburg empty-handed." Barrett sprang from his rock, sword clenched and fists white with anger. "You calculating bastard, I warned you." Illyrian's voice rang over Barrett's threats. "Warriors, your leader proposes treason." Barrett advanced. His curled brown hair clung damply to his temples. His sword was poised for a strike. "Enough, Illyrian. It is you who proposes treason. If I bring the Baron nothing else, I'll hand him your lying head." Illyrian backstepped, suddenly afraid. His prepared speech nearly caught on his dry tongue. "If you oppose me, you also stand against the gods who sanctioned me in this quest." The sky went ominously dark. Wisps of gray fog obscured the newly risen sun. The soldiers waited, uncertain. As Barrett lunged forward, Illyrian retreated with a growled threat. From habit, his hands dropped to the hilt of his own weapon. Thunder ground through Illyrian's ears, covering Barrett's furious explicative. The clouds split open. A jagged bar of lightning lanced for Barrett like a striking snake. It crashed against his raised sword. Energy pulsed through the commander, hurling him limp to the ground. Nothing in Mordath's description had prepared Illyrian for the grandeur of the sorcerer's attack. The force of the backlash toppled the nobleman. The odor of burnt flesh pinched his nostrils, and pinpoints of light slashed his face. Shock emptied his memory of the next step in his own plan. The guardsmen gawked in blank surprise. Blood-colored sparks cast an eerie red glow in their pale faces. Illyrian knew these men had never before witnessed even the simplest of Mordath's magics. To them, the furious assault from the heavens could only be attributed to an angry god. Illyrian used a few extra seconds his foreknowledge gained him to crawl to Barrett's side. He placed his fingers on the guardsman's neck. A pulse throbbed against Illyrian's touch. Unobtrusively, he caught the cartilage of the commander's throat between his thumb and first finger. A quick, subtle twist crushed Barrett's windpipe. The large man was racked by death throes. Then they went ominously still. Consumed by poisonous triumph, Illyrian rose, his face twisted with false sorrow. "He's dead," he informed the horror-stricken guardsman. The sky remained shadowed and expectant. Spurred by the glory of murder and control, Illyrian gathered his scattered wits. "Mardane has spoken in the Baron's name. He has slain the traitor and passed his command to me. Any man who would oppose my authority, speak now and face Mardane's wrath." The clouds bunched tighter. The men watched in silence, throttled by a hush of superstitious belief. To Illyrian's relief, no man stepped forward. Mordath had expressly stated he would not repeat the grand performance and risk his life energy again. Suddenly, Illyrian realized that the three survivors at the fugitives' camp were aware of Mordath's abilities and could not be allowed to rejoin the troop. Their speculations would surely reveal the deception. Illyrian continued, his voice resonant in the awed stillness. "The plan has changed. The barbarians slaughtered our captain. The gods will it that he pay with his life. Kill him on sight. Any who stand in our way must be slain as well." Bored by the seemingly endless chase and desperate for war and a chance at heroism, the soldiers rallied about Illyrian, mad for revenge. The ride to Kalmar port seemed unbearably long to Tazir. Once through the passes of the Colding Hills, his companions bickering about direction drove him to take the lead of the party. Shunning the forests, he chose hard-packed roadways, following street signs and, when available, strangers' advice. Tazir's course displeased Moonbear and Erdmore. The open terrain made them as skittish as caged foxes. From the time Moonbear dismissed Erdmore's shortcut, the woodsman went sullen. He spoke stiltedly of hunts, battles, and woodlands with Moonbear. He rarely addressed Tazir. When he did, it was usually with an undertone of hostility and always as boy or child. But when they stopped and wandered into the forest to make camp each night, Erdmore supplied freshly killed meat to add to the fare of roots and berries. Tazir found the woodsman's presence too valuable to make any strenuous objections. Each evening, Tazir faithfully practiced sword forms while his companions prepared supper and tended the horses. Without an instructor, he never quite knew whether he had performed the maneuvers correctly. His only feedback came on the second night of their journey. Erdmore glanced up from a mouthful of raspberries. "Shadow," he said, "you know just enough swordplay to endanger yourself." The following night, Tazir trained deeper in the woods, out of sight of his critical companion. Despite its practical dangers, Tazir's strategy of using traveled pathways paid off. The 6-day trek to Port Kalmar through forest was condensed to a 3-day ride with no sight or sound of the Baron's army. At midday, still a half-day's walk from the town proper, the horse and cart traffic to the port city thickened. Huge, tarp-covered wagons jounced along the roadways, filled with goods bound for the Northlands. The three dusty travelers and their odd-looking steeds drew more than their share of stares from the merchants they passed. Moonbear seemed unusually cheerful. With this many merchants headed for Kalmar, the summer ferry has not cast off yet. Now, let us dispose of these beasts we are riding. My legs are aching. Tizir laughed, by now familiar with Moonbear's attempts to rid them of the horses, but this time he found a twisted logic in the suggestion. You do have a point. Some of these merchants may have come from the direction of Collinsburg. No need to draw more attention to ourselves with these glaringly ugly steeds. He dismounted and led his horse into the forest. His companions followed. Leaving the animals to graze on foliage, they continued on to the city on foot. Some distance further, the forest dwindled and disappeared, replaced by square-cut fields of wheat and beans, punctuated by clusters of blueberry bushes. Birds swarmed over the low, twisted shrubs, their beaks and talons smeared purple from the feast. Between the neat gardens sat hovels of wood, stone, and mud. As Tizir and his companions drew closer, the cottages became more densely packed, and the crops changed to potatoes, turnips, and beets. Tizir's dreams of beer and a warm bed inched closer to reality. The last desperate entreaties of merchants in the marketplace echoed through the graying streets. The sound cut through Tizir like a knife, bringing memories of his own stand and his carefully lettered promise, I can get anything. Attuned like a musician to the seller's boasts, Tizir felt comfortable within the confines of the city. Ardmore led Tizir and Moonbear along a crowded side road. If recollection serves me, there's an inn down this way. Interested? Tizir replied before Moonbear could open his mouth. Nothing, he said with enthusiastic sincerity, would make me happier. They continued down the alleyway as the calls in the market grew distant. Peasants with greasy hair hovered in the cottage doorways, their homespun hanging in untidy wrinkles. No one seemed to take notice of Tizir and his companions. Apparently, the populace was quite accustomed to strangers. The inn stood alone at the end of the street, its weathered sign battered and unreadable. Stone steps led to its lighted interior. The door was wedged open to admit the last few rays of sunshine before twilight. From a distance, Tizir could see the bobbing shadows of people moving inside. Boisterous voices leaked into the alleyway which reeked of drink. But for all its noise, the inn seemed a welcome change from days in the brooding forest. Tizir was the first to climb the stairs and step inside, but his companions followed swiftly. The thief was immediately struck by the odor of sweat and salt air. Smoke rolled from the hearth fire, shrouding the rowdy patrons. Great barrels and kegs lined the opposite wall beneath shelves of bowls, mugs, and glassware. A stained wooden bar ran from wall to wall. The patrons clustered here, away from the heat of the fire. Despite the crowd, Tizir wound his way to an empty table. Spilled beer discolored the tabletop in spidery outlines. The legs of its 4 chairs had cut long grooves into the floor. Tizir selected a seat with his back to the fire and the winding stairway, which led to the inn rooms above. Moonbear sat beside him, but Ardmore remained standing. The woodsman said, Stay here. I'll go to the bar and get us a room. I'll pick up a few beers, too. It'll give us something to sip until the help gets through this crowd to take our dinner order. He paused, looking sheepish. His voice acquired an embarrassed tone. Either of you have any money? Recalling the coins he had taken from Mordath, Tizir reached into his pocket. He flicked open the pouch and explored the contents with his fingers. The metal pieces sifted through his hand. He settled on a large, round coin with a central hole. From its size, Tizir guessed it was a copper. He flipped it onto the table. Mordath graciously agreed to pay for tonight's. He broke off as the coin rolled across the tabletop, ruddy yellow in the hearth light. It was gold. The coin spun awkwardly on its edge, each pass bringing it closer to the table's edge. Raised in a city where flashing wealth meant losing it to thieves, Tizir instinctively slapped his hand over the gold piece. Quickly, he exchanged it for a smaller coin and slid the latter to Ardmore. The woodsman wore a surprised look, but apparently, intent on other matters, he said nothing. He trotted through the crowd. Penrigger, said Moonbear. The word had no meaning to Tizir. He tore his gaze from a pair of fishermen carrying a companion who was deep in a drunken stupor. What? The coin you have is a Penrigger. It is worth about 50 of your ducats. How do you know that? Moonbear shrugged his meaty shoulders. It is a Scandinavian coin. Tizir persisted. But I didn't think your people had a monetary system. We do not, Moonbear admitted, but many of our neighbors in the cities do. We have only few dealings with them, but a man who wintered with my people bought supplies there. He brought coins from your city and exchanged them for Scandinavian ones. Interest spiraled through Tazir. You have cities? Moonbear laced his fingers on the tabletop, wearing a smirk of wry amusement. Did you imagine Sweden as one big forest? Tazir stared at his toes, his misconception embarrassingly evident. I didn't think about it. My people tell stories of the wild northlands across the sea, he flushed. I suppose you don't really have dragons or sorcerers either. It is rumored the Dragon Rank school grounds lie in Norway, but I never saw a wizard until Wynneth. Moonbear leaned his chin on his clasped hands. Tazir smiled, more confident with his decision to remain with Moonbear. Once across the Kattegat, he could remain in a Swedish city, well beyond the Baron's influence. Moonbear added conversationally, Of course, the language is completely different. Jolted by the realization he would need to learn a new tongue, Tazir discovered self-doubt. Before he could reply, a seaman bellowed for a barmaid to fill his tankard. His heavy dialect distorted his words. Tazir paid more heed to the bawdy conversations around them. The patron spoke in a slurred, simplified version of the barony's tongue, liberally colored with foreign syllables and inflections. Erdmore returned, balancing 3 foam-capped mugs. He set them on the table, casually selected 2, and slid them to his companions. He sat across from Tazir. Sorry it took so long. I checked the room. It'll be cramped sleeping tonight. He addressed Tazir directly. Want your change, boy? You keep it. Tazir wrapped his fingers around the mug, eager for the taste of beer. And it can't be any worse than sleeping on sticks and dried leaves. He raised his drink to his lips and quaffed hungrily. Immediately, a bitter taste coated his tongue, gagging him. His face pinched in revulsion. His voice went thin and strained. Gods, this is the sourest beer I've ever had. Erdmore meant Tazir's pronouncement with a scornful chuckle. Can't handle a man's drink. He downed half his mug with a single gulp. Erdmore's mocking challenge infuriated Tazir. It reminded him of a day 8 years ago in Collinsburg's alleyway. Then, giddy with stolen wine, Tazir had amused his gang brothers with an awkward fall to the cobbled street, which scraped a gash on his arm. Baron had hoisted his drunken companion to his feet, jeering. "You daisy, you hold liquor like a girl." Warren laughed. "Mouse'd drink him under the table." Humiliated, Tazir had practiced binging until he handled his beer more easily than any of his fellows, except Blade. Now, goaded by Erdmore's jibes and his own insecurity, Tazir downed the acrid beer. He wiped his mouth on his sleeve, and struggled to restrain a grimace. I'll buy the next round, he said, forgetting in his anger that he had purchased the last. I'll get it, said Erdmore, accepting the gold coin Tazir pressed into his hand. He tossed down the remainder of his drink and headed back to the bar. Tazir watched Moonbear sip his drink more slowly. Erdmore's absence allowed Tazir to regain control of his temper. He confided in Moonbear. Somehow that man always makes me feel incompetent. He's treated me like a blundering child since we met him. The more I try to prove myself, the clumsier I seem. Moonbear finished his drink, nodding sagely. Why do you care what he thinks? Tazir tapped his fingers with puzzlement. I have no idea. I think he reminds me too much of my father. Both men fell silent as Erdmore arrived with a beer. The woodsman divided the drinks. Barmaid ought to be along pretty soon to take an order. No hurry. Tazir's eyes stung from the smoke. With time, the hearth fire appeared to be becoming brighter. We have our drinks. He felt an odd complacency. The beer in the mugs dwindled slowly. Moonbear sipped his drink in silence, but he seemed to have lost his aura of wild discomfort. A swirl of smoke unfocused Tazir's vision. The milling crowd blurred to outlines, and he watched the other patrons with disinterested eyes. Nausea overtook him halfway through his second beer. I don't think I'm hungry. The words emerged slurred. A hand brushed Tazir's shoulder. Are you well? Sickness rocked Tazir's gut, preventing an answer. He rose. Vertigo dropped him to his knees. The shock of the fall drove purpose through him. His mind responded sluggishly. Gripping the edge of the table, he struggled to his feet. Tazir forced words between lips which felt numb. The beer. With heroic determination, he dove for Erdmore's mug. His hand struck the tankard, and momentum swept it from the table. Beer sprayed across Erdmore and the floor. The mug hit the ground with a ring of sound. Too much to drink. The apology sounded in Tazir's ears as if from a great distance. He toppled from the table and crashed to the floor. Darkness enfolded his consciousness, cold and silent as death. Ardmore marched through the dimly lit streets of Kalmar Port, hoping to find a merchant before they all closed for the night. Moonbear and Tazir lay bound in the inn room, victims of carefully measured doses of poppy extract. It seemed simple now. Ardmore knew the silver in his pocket would buy a decent wagon and a horse team. If he followed the roadway south, he would eventually reach Collinsburg, where he could turn his charges over directly to the Baron. I can avoid dealing with Salek's band of children. Ardmore's thoughts went bitter as he recalled the soldiers' attack on their camp. If they'd allowed me to lead Moonbear and Shadow to Hawk Rock like I'd planned, things would never have gone this far. At least they had the sense to bind me too and divert suspicion. A curtain of cloud swept in from the south, claiming the light of moon and stars. Ardmore cursed. The early darkness would make it even harder to find a merchant in the streets. Resigned to purchasing his horse cart from a farmer, Ardmore reversed his direction and sidled into an alley. The man will probably ask some exorbitant sum for a rattletrap wagon and a doddering fossil of a horse. Deeper in the alleyway, a flash of green light drew Ardmore's attention. Rain trickled from the heavens, further irritating him. Through the haze, his eyes traced the outline of a man clutching his staff, his blonde cascade of hair visible even through the storm. Mordath, well, I'm glad you're here. I can get your gem. Mordath replied with a disdainful laugh. So can I, but I'll have your life first. He made a bold gesture. The rain gusted into opaque sheets. Lightning flared, splitting the sky like hellfire, then sped toward Ardmore. No, cried Ardmore in outraged disbelief. He grasped his sword hilt and charged Mordath. A discarded rag wrapped about his ankles, sprawling him. The lightning crashed to the ground before him with a roar of sound. White-hot sparks stung his face. Static crackled, raising every hair on his body. He struggled to his feet, struck blind by light. Mordath, stop, you idiot, we can talk. Mordath's curse bounced from the wallstones. Grimly aware he could not battle the Dragon Rank's magic alone, Ardmore whirled and ran. Booted footfalls pursued him. Sightless, he careened down the roadway. He groped the air before him, trying to map the streets in his memory. Gradually, Ardmore's vision returned. His running steps grew more confident. Wind rattled against the ancient windows in the few shops rich enough to have glass panes. Thunder shook the cobbled streets. Ardmore plunged into an alleyway. The looming bulk of the inn appeared before him. By the nearness of his tread, Mordath had already narrowed the gap between them. Ardmore sped toward the inn. To his relief, the door still stood open. He sprinted up the stone porch steps and plowed through the milling crowd, arms bent protectively before his face. His elbow drove into a fisherman's chest. The man staggered and clawed, bringing several others crashing down in a wheel of flailing limbs. Ardmore dodged aside. A hand seized his shirt, and a coarse blasphemy hissed into his ear. He twisted, still running. The fringe of his buckskins gave. Momentum carried him forward awkwardly. He jostled an arm. Wine splattered in a sticky stream down Ardmore's forearm. The glass shattered on the floor, and a heavy foot smashed it to powder. Ardmore gained the stairway, unable to sound out Mordath in the screamed cacophony beneath him. He took the stairs two at a time, fumbling in his pocket as he ran. His fingers muddled through silver to the key. Freeing it, he hurtled down the corridor and stopped before his room. Behind him, he heard the slam of feet on the stairway. He dared not look back. Jamming the key into the lock, he twisted. The panel yielded. Ardmore blustered within and slammed the door on his heels. Breath rasped through Ardmore's lungs. He took in the room at a glance. Moonbear and Tazir lay trussed on the floor, their eyes open and interested. The shadow climber had already managed to work his hands partially free. Anger tore through Ardmore at the thought of sacrificing his bounty, but he needed Moonbear's aid to fend off the sorcerer. Aware his companions could not know who drugged them, he covered the length of the chamber in 3 running steps. Something jarred the door. Ardmore drew his hunting knife and slit the ropes which held Moonbear. A more benign lightning from the storm flared across the scratched purple glass of the window. Light oozed like water beneath the door jamb. Suddenly, the panel sagged on its hinges, and Mordath's black-robed form filled the archway. Ardmore thrust a sword hilt into Moonbear's hand, and drew his own weapon as the sorcerer advanced. Ardmore lunged. Inches from Mordath's gut, the sword crashed against an invisible barrier, jolting the woodsman to the elbow. He finished the form from habit. He cut upward. Again his blade impacted something unseen. What in Khorana's hell? How can we hope to win this battle without knowledge of Mordath's powers? To Ardmore's left, Moonbear's strokes met the same resistance. Repeatedly, the swordsman's blades jangled against the solid form of Mordath's sorcery, seeking a flaw in the bunch's magics. Yet, despite his success, Mordath maintained a stance devoid of triumph, his face masked in hairy creases of concentration. He made no attempt to strike through his own spell nor to dodge Ardmore's enraged but ineffectual sword blows. After a time, Ardmore backstepped sword poised. Moonbear imitated his companion's retreat. Uncertain whether Mordath could hear through his barrier, Ardmore shouted in impotent rage, "You're safe now, wizard, but the moment you drop your guard, I'll kill you." A movement behind Mordath caught Ardmore's eye. A small figure flitted across the landing. Shadow! Realizing the thief had escaped through the windows, Ardmore tried to draw Mordath's attention with another futile cut against the invisible shield. Suddenly, Mordath recoiled, his head twisted toward Tazir. Ardmore sprang. This time, his lunge met no resistance. The stone in the sorcerer's staff winked, scattering green highlights through the corridor. Mordath disappeared. Ardmore's sword sliced the air where he had stood. "Hey!" Tazir cringed away from Ardmore's frenzied onslaught. "I'm a friend." Ardmore swore for a full minute. When he finished, Tazir caught his forearm reassuringly. "At least he's gone for now. Thanks for freeing us." Ardmore grumbled. "Sure." He realized, with some satisfaction, that Tazir believed Mordath had poisoned the drinks. Seeking to reinforce the misconception, Ardmore continued, "And thanks to you, your quick action saved me from taking much of the beer too." A grin split Tazir's face, but he seemed pleased by the praise. But just as suddenly, his smile wilted. "Friends," said the Shadow Climber, surveying the wreckage from the landing, "I don't think we're welcome in this inn any longer."